Chancellor House Holdings, the investment arm of the ANC, has admitted the party is a beneficiary of a trust that owns the company. Chancellor House has been accused of being an ANC front company. Now, this after the Independent Electoral Commission released its first quarterly report on political party donations. Political analyst Ongama Mtimka joins us via Zoom to discuss this. A very good evening to you, Ongama. So, what does this mean for the ANC, who has essentially been saying that they are trying to get a bit more money from the public?
Good evening, Morena, and your viewers. Well, the party seems to be in trouble in terms of its ability to raise money for its operations. It's very interesting what's going to happen with the elections. When it comes to the allegations made against Chancellor House and potentially corrupt relationships, all that simply needs to happen there, especially as far as ESCOM is concerned, is for the current leadership to actually get to the bottom of this and make sure that whatever funds need to be recouped further, they get to be, because we sit with two huge assets that have cost South African taxpayers money without delivering the value that was envisaged. I mean, back in the day when the project was being motivated, Medupi and Kusile, there was a view that our supply would outstrip demand once those two projects come online. But it hasn't happened. So there are elements where there just needs to be investigations that lead to consequences, and then there are issues that need a broader discussion. I think that the openness that's availed by the Party Funding Act is a step in the right direction, and it's even more exciting that we've now started getting reports, because then we can do the validation work of reviewing the financial statements of these parties, and where they do not correspond, it makes the works of investigative journalists as well as auditors a lot easier, and watchdog organizations as well. So it's good that we are finding ourselves under this party funding regime in South Africa.
What does it mean to the voter in Kabeja, in Ngamakwe, Olundi, in Vuani, who just wants to vote for somebody that's going to bring change in their community? Yes, these parties and these politicians are living large, as they're seeing on their TVs or hearing on their radios. So what does finding out that there's a Chancellor House Holdings that is, involved in some kind of perceived corruption mean to them on the ground?
Sure. I think that transparency and accountability goes a long way in changing voter behavior over time. Countries that are in transition tend to have voters vote on the basis of loyalty to the party. But as years go by, that voting behavior shifts towards what we call regime performance, but also it shifts towards being a lot more influenced by current events. And also the population shifts from being not concerned about democracy for itself and transparency for itself, but rather more concerned, for its instrumental value. So it shifts from that to actually demanding democracy for itself. That's why you've seen in countries where once there's a growing middle class, the very success of that government it sows the seeds of revolution. So even in this instance, more revelations that make it into the public domain about the conduct of political parties adds up being among one of those things, some of those things that get to be considered when voters vote. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen as fast as observers and theoreticians would like to have. But over time, we begin to see the influence of media coverage and scandals when it comes to affecting the electoral prospects of a political party. So indeed, they do contribute, but we may not necessarily see that in drastic ways. But definitely, if you look at the support of the ANC, for example, since 2009, after it secured a two-thirds majority in the mid-2000s, we see a long-term downward trend.
I am an ANC member, and I am incredibly concerned with the revelations of my party. You know, what is happening with my party in an electoral year, in that we are missing the deadlines for the registration of candidates lists, and now there is a Chancellor House that has been accused of being an ANC front company. Ongama, what am I then supposed to do as an ANC member when my party is seemingly imploding?
There are two things that people have done. One, either shipping out and exploring alternatives. The most dominant thing within the ANC has been to try and fight from within. Unfortunately, things like these form part of what has been regarded as ANC secrets. So, for example, we don't know exactly who the politicians that were involved are. So it's not a clear case of, okay, a member can say this is attributable to Jacob Zuma, because, for example, Chancellor House has existed long before his time. There have been allegations of the existence of it and its corrupt dealings with the state for a long time. So, because it's not easy to, pin down certain politicians, those who then choose to fight from within find it difficult to actually, direct their activities to against specific people. But if you look at the broader party politics of the ANC, there's been a group that has been singled out as pushing more towards corrupt dealings, and there's action against those people. Whether or not that's correct, it's something else which ANC members actually need to think about, because it seems to me that, the party and corruption have become synonymous, if we are to use the accused number one thesis.
Let's look at the three parties that are essentially, the core of South African politics at the moment. In the last 5 years, between the local government elections of 2016, the historic local government elections of 2016, and what is set to happen this year, you've had the ANC that has had, this year alone, Ace Magashule, Carl Niehaus, and obviously everything else that has happened in between with the ANC as the governing party. You've had the DA that has lost its Joburg mayor, has lost its leader in parliament, has had to elect a new leader in parliament, has had Helen Ziller being brought in as the Federal Council leader. You've got the EFF that has been implicated, at least Floyd Shivambu, in the VBS scandal, or at least his family member. The three major parties in South African politics have had their own troubles in the last 5 years since the last local government elections. As a voter who's looking for somebody to vote for that will take this country forward, who then do you look to? What is the political landscape of 2021 saying to the man on the ground who must now go to the polls on the 1st of November?
Sure. So the two major parties, Democratic Alliance and ANC, are have faced recently huge problems, such as implosion from both sides. And I think there, especially the DA, is at an advantage as far as it simplifying what its offering is to voters. Whether or not that's going to be appreciated is going to be something else. It seems to me that the elites within the party have made a strategic choice that there's a particular constituency that they would rather not alienate. So what they have done in the recent past has been to reaffirm their position in terms of what their offering is, mainly to that core constituency. And it appears that the party, whatever strategic path it takes beyond this period, would be something which actually becomes a function of what happens in the broader political system. I think that they might just go back to the broad church politics, which they have turned their back on. Helen Zille, by the way, was very instrumental in driving the party towards that direction, and very instrumental in pulling it back from that direction. So it's going to be interesting what happens. Then, if you look at the ANC is undergoing what it should have guarded and prevented from happening in the party is what has now cost it the complete collapse of its values. It's now attempting to reclaim those in terms of at least the messaging and the action that we've seen against those that are accused of corruption. Whether or not voters are going to believe that is something else. But I'm excited about a process that I call dynamic fragmentation at the level of smaller parties, where you are seeing nice offshoots of political parties without the racial baggage that, for example, the EFF has attempted to do in ways that are not, just within the context of fighting an economic struggle, but polarizing and also, turning a back on the choice that we made in the transition to democracy of what kind of citizenship we wanted. So I'm more excited about what's happening at the level of smaller parties, and South Africa being a country where proportional representation is used. It's a complete lie that voting for smaller parties is wasting a vote, because you see what happens is that those at a national level, those parties get to have representation, but also even at a local government level, they get to have representation. We're not using a constituency-based system where if you didn't win a constituency, you don't get to be represented in councils or in legislative houses.
Mr. Mtimka, I've gone way over my time, but I want to get your thoughts very quickly on this. Is the ANC faithful member and ordinary citizen that wants to continue voting for the party, is there any reason for them to worry about the Chancellor House Holdings situation?
Absolutely, especially within the context of a party that wants to renew itself. This should be one of those things that are acted harshly on. And in fact, ANC members need to demand answers from the leadership, especially around the corruption part of things. It's expected that non-profit organizations find ways to be self-sustainable, but it cannot be accepted that a governing party with so much influence over state decision-making is allowed to venture into the kinds of deals that end up, leading to requirements for people or for organizations to bribe in order for them to secure contracts with the state, as it is alleged in the case of Hitachi.
Ongama, Nkosi Tata, for your time this evening. That is political analyst Ongama Mtimka, of course, just unpacking essentially the Chancellor House Holdings scandal that is now involving the ruling party, the ANC, this ahead of the local government elections.